The Forgotten Soldier. He went off to fight in the Great War and never came home. By Charlie Connelly. Read by Adrian Palmer. Chapter 1. A shadow flitting on the very edge of history. I didn't know it at the time, but the silence on the other end of the line was the silence of nearly a century. I'd been researching the family tree and was proving to be barely competent as a beginner genealogist. That said, I'd somehow managed to barge my clumsy way back through the records as far as the beginning of the 20th century, and I was on the phone to my dad to update him on some of the things I'd found. So, yes, North Kensington was where your grandparents were living at the time, just by Ladbroke Grove, I said. Oh, I added, almost as an afterthought, and I've also found your Uncle Edward, who was killed in the First World War. Silence. I didn't know anything about that, said the quiet voice at the other end of the line. Private Edward Charles John Connelly of the 10th Battalion, Queen's Royal West Surrey Regiment, was killed in Flanders on 4th of November 1918. He was 19 years old. Edward was my grandfather's elder brother, my father's uncle, and here was my father telling me that he didn't even know he'd had an Uncle Edward. How could it be that my dad, who was given the middle name Edward when he was born more than 2 decades after Edward Connelly's death, had never been told about his own uncle? Dad had always told me that his father, who was barely 16 years old when the Great War ended, had lied about his age and enlisted, but never spoke about what he experienced. To think that that included the actual existence of his brother, however, seemed an extraordinary thing. But then my grandfather's reticence was not unusual. It's something you hear quite often about men of that generation. How the things they saw and experienced had been so traumatizing that they'd compartmentalized their memories and sent them away to somewhere in the furthest wispy caverns of the mind, never to emerge again. My grandfather was to all intents and purposes still a child during the war, yet he'd been to a place almost as close to hell on earth as anyone could imagine. Is it any wonder that he wasn't chatting amiably away about it at the kitchen table while filling in his Pools coupon? Maybe in there, enmeshed among the memories and experiences that he'd closed away forever, was his own brother, who'd gone off to war and never come home. Maybe he'd felt some kind of survivor guilt, that the boy who really had no business being there in the first place had returned, but his big brother never did, never had the chance to marry and have a family, to have a long and busy life and leave a legacy of memories and experience that would succeed him for generations. Maybe this was how Edward Connelly fell between the cracks of history and the fissures of memory to lie forgotten in the Belgian mud for the best part of a century. Perhaps this is how the silence fell over a boy sent off to war, to die in a strange country at the arse end of a horrendous conflict that was effectively all over, pending official confirmation, from a bunch of paunchy bigwigs with fountain pens in a French railway carriage a week later. The mystery of the forgotten soldier in the family history was one that would come to intrigue me more and more. Of all the pointless deaths of the 1914-18 conflict, Edward Connelly's seems more pointless than most. The war on the Western Front was all but over, and the armies were effectively going through the motions. By 4th of November 1918, the outcome was beyond doubt. The Germans had gambled everything on their spring offensive earlier in the year, and despite making significant territorial gains, had been forced back way beyond their original lines and all but collapsed. Morale at home and on the front had imploded. The money was running out. The game was up. The last couple of weeks before the Armistice were pretty much token efforts at attack and defence, largely spent with the Allies chasing the retreating Germans across the Belgian countryside towards Germany. One of those token efforts killed a token soldier. Private Edward Connelly, a 19-year-old railway carriage washer from West London. I knew nothing about him, or the circumstances of his death, but it all seemed so pointless and unfair, and I wanted to know more.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?